With the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, it became clear from many indirect sources that there are quite a few ethnic minorities in the Russian army. This situation raises a number of questions as to why that was the case and why ethnic minorities take part in the special operation. To begin with, let's specify which minorities we're talking about. There is no official data on this. The Russian army does not release any information even on casualties. But many indirect sources confirm that ethnic minorities occupy an excessively large percentage of the army in proportion to the population. According to the last census, Russians account for more than 80% of the population, but the army composition is different. Thus, according to open-source estimates of Russian casualties, the majority are usually from ethnic republics with non-Slavic names and surnames. There was a lot of data with different lists of soldiers, clearly dominated by national minorities. A list of soldiers that were treated in a hospital in Rostov was made publicly available, and of the 150 people that were there, half had names like Mohammed. At that time, it was reported that there are many people from Dagestan. And here's a paradox. The propaganda of the armed conflict is aimed at the Russian population, not ethnic minorities. The term "Russian world" appeals to Russians, and not to national minorities, although Russian propaganda is not consistent in this regard. So why do ethnic minorities take part in the special operation? The first and key reason is the economic inequality of the regions. According to the Federal State Statistics Service, the income of more than 17 million Russian citizens is below the living wage. In Russia, it is 11,653 rubles per month. The regions with the largest number of poor people are Tuva, Ingushetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, and the Altai Republic. In these regions, the poverty rate reaches 25 to 30%. That is, literally one-third of the population lives on less than 11,000 rubles per month. A similar situation is observed in other regions like Dagestan, Buryatia, Kalmykia, and other national minority republics. At the same time, the most prosperous regions are considered to be those where Russians live: Moscow, St. Petersburg, Nizhny Novgorod, Kursk, Belgorod, and so on. In this regard, Tatarstan is the only relatively wealthy region. In terms of wages, the situation is generally similar. Last year, RIA Novosti commissioned a regional survey on average salaries. Based on this data, we can clearly see that the poorest regions are Kalmykia, with salaries ranging from 17 to 34,000 rubles a month, Mordovia with 18 to 34,000. Similar figures are in Dagestan, Ingushetia, Chechnya, Kabardino-Balkaria, and so on. Among the richest, Chukotka Autonomous Okrug, Yamal-Nenets, Magadan, Moscow, Kamchatka, and others. In these regions, the absolute majority of the population are Russians. Salaries there range from 40 to 150,000 rubles. Even the minimal wages there are higher than the maximum wages in the poorest ethnic republics. This economic inequality has forced people from poor republics to join the military. Usually, military service pays more than other jobs in the region, and in general it acts as a social elevator for the poor population. They don't have any other means of providing for their families. Since the beginning of the special operation, the financial issue has become even more pressing. According to various sources, the monthly salary for military service ranges from 100 to 300,000. These amounts are quite substantial even for the richest regions, and many people don't have the opportunity to make that amount in a year. In general, economic incentives have lured the poorest stratum of the Russian population into military service. They live in republics like Dagestan, Ingushetia, or Tuva. People from richer regions generally aren't ready to risk their lives even for a decent salary. The second reason is demographics. Even before the special operation, mostly young people between the ages of 18 and 40 were recruited for contract service. With the beginning of the conflict, this changed. Nevertheless, the priority for conscription has always been the younger generation, which is more resilient. So, if you look at the fertility rate by Russian regions, it immediately becomes clear where the population keeps growing and where is it aging. According to the Federal State Statistics Service, the highest fertility rate is observed in many ethnic republics. In the Tuva Republic, the fertility rate is almost 3 children per a woman, 2.5 in Chechnya and 2 in Altai. High rates are observed in Dagestan, Yakutia, Buryatia, and others. The lowest fertility rates are observed in Russian regions, so Penza, Saratov, Ivanovo, Belgorod, and other regions with predominantly Russian population are ranked low. Their fertility rates are around 1.2–1.3, which is comparable with the lowest rates in the whole world. This creates another cross-section of the population in terms of age. In Chechnya, the average age is 28, but in the Tver region it's 42, in Tuva it is 29, and in the Bryansk region it's 41, 32 in Dagestan, and 40 in Kaliningrad, and so on. Age composition also plays an important role, and national minorities now have a younger generation than regions populated by Russians. Therefore, they have more able-bodied men. There are secondary reasons. Among them is a lack of sentiment for Ukrainian soldiers and population. Despite the propaganda, a Russian soldier is still closer to a Ukrainian, as opposed to a soldier from the Russian provinces. Cultural differences also play an important role. Residents of ethnic republics have nothing to do with Ukraine and its population, so in their eyes they are a foreign nation. Now let's talk about the threats that such an army could pose. At the moment, there are only two. The first is the resentment of the local population that ethnic minorities bear the brunt of the conflict, while Russians do not incur such costs, even though the Russian population is many times larger. Moreover, national minorities are mistreated in the army and are often placed in the front lines. The second threat is the growing military experience among ethnic minorities, which could lead to confrontations in the event of instability. Even though many of them die, the rest gain combat experience, which could become the basis for separatist movements in the future. Strong national leaders in a particular republic can emerge from the current army, and this is not always good. A similar situation took place when Djokhar Dudayev became the leader of Chechnya and declared its independence in 1991. Throughout his whole life, he served in the Soviet army, even taking part in the Soviet-Afghan War, though he himself denied it. He seemed like a trustworthy and loyal soldier of the Soviet regime. However, with the rising instability in the Soviet Union, he became a leader of a separatist movement. In summary, national minorities are motivated to take up arms by money, because they live in the poorest regions of Russia. Demographics also play a role. Because of high birth rates, these regions have younger populations, which means that they have more able-bodied men. This video was made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon, Boosty, and YouTube. If you like our content, please consider supporting us.